Are national championships valid? Yes and no. Some are, some aren't. Welcome to our new series here at the Voice of College Football, challenging the national championships. Of course, if you've joined us in the past, you know that I don't necessarily give validity to all the national champions that have been voted on in the past. We have three basic eras of national champions. Over the past 9 seasons, we've had a college football playoff. And I am going to tell you right out of the gate, right up front, I am not going to dispute any of these national champions. They competed on the field against two of the best teams in the country. They earned a right, as selected by a playoff. They had one of the best resumes in the country to be selected among the top 4. Even if I disagreed with that 4 that were chosen, they then went out that particular season's national champion and defeated 2 of the very best to earn that national championship. I will dispute some of the selections that were made for the 4 teams in the playoff 2014 to 2022. Back further in our series, we'll go to the BCS era, 1998 to 2013, a very flawed era in regards to national championships. However, at least there was a national championship game, a BCS national championship game pitting 2 of the best teams in the country, possibly the 2 best, possibly 2 of the 3 best or the 4 best or the 5 best, but at least 2 of the top teams in the nation were pitted against each other, matched up to determine a national champion. Prior to 1998, of course, we had the poll era that goes all the way back to 1936, where writers and coaches, and typically not even the coaches, voted for the rankings each week that led to a national championship vote prior to the bowls at one point, then after the bowls at another point early in the 1970s to determine the national champion. That is extremely flawed. You can only have one national champion as voted on by anyone. The problem is that many times you had 2 teams, 3 teams, 4 teams, and even more at times that had a right, a argument for a national championship season if you look at it objectively. And that's what we're going to do, is look at it objectively. This is not going to be, for the most part, my opinion on this team would have beaten this team. No, we're not going to play that game here. We can do that elsewhere in another series. We can match up 1997 Nebraska against 1997 Michigan and say, I like a particular team's better wins or better schedule or whatever the factors. If we look at yards per game and we look at other metrics, ranked teams played, and we can make a judgment call that I will never say. I will never make this statement. So-and-so definitely would have defeated so-and-so. I will never make that claim. It can't be proven in any such way. I could say, I think that they would beat this other team. However, we will not do that here. We are objectively looking at resumes, which becomes difficult, in particular looking at the Power 5 versus the Group of 5 in the college football playoff era and into the BCS, with teams performing well in the Group of 5 like TCU and Boise State at times with superior records to the teams we will be comparing them to. But let's go through the college football playoff era. I was asked at the outset of this era many times by folks, is this a good system? And I said, no, it's not a good system. It does not afford every conference, every power conference, an opportunity to play for a national championship. Therefore, we're going to have the same issues that we had with the BCS. It's a selective system. It's an invitational. It's not a playoff system. An objective playoff system is like what they have in the NFL or other major league sports, where the standings, the results on the field determine the playoff, not human beings. But, of course, it's a better system because what we've done is we have taken 4 of the best teams in the country and we're putting them on the field to determine the championship. So at least there is an opportunity for the teams to play on the field and decide it on the field. Let's start with 2022. Please, if you enjoy the content, like the video. Even if you don't agree with me, please like the video. Keep us going here at the Voice of College Football, going strong. Share the videos out on social media. Can you believe that there are folks out there? Can you imagine this life? Not knowing that we are here at the Voice of College Football discussing, debating, analyzing college football with you every day All right, let's get to 2022. The final college football playoff rankings look like this. Georgia 1, the eventual national champion, Michigan 2, TCU 3, and Ohio State 4. Based on record, that is exactly the way it should have played out. Ohio State, despite a 3-score loss to Michigan, finished 11-1. The only two possible arguments come from Alabama and Tennessee, not based on record, but based on performance on the field, wins and losses on the field against the quality of opponents in the SEC. Of course, Alabama went 10-2. They lost on the last play of the game twice to LSU, who went to the SEC championship game, and Tennessee in Knoxville, 52-49. Tennessee lost a 2-score game that was much worse than that, but to the very best team in the country, Georgia, who was basically not challenged much of the season. You could argue Missouri, and then, of course, Ohio State later in the season. And then, of course, Tennessee was blown out by South Carolina. So the College Football Playoff Committee got it right. Georgia, Michigan, TCU, and Ohio State, with the Bulldogs, of course, marching on to a national championship. 2021 saw, of course, our first group of 5 team reach the College Football Playoff. I thought that this would never happen, but lightning struck in this such way. Cincinnati had the exact game that they needed to play to reach the College Football Playoff and show the committee that they could defeat another top team in the country. Consider that 9 years earlier that Notre Dame and Cincinnati signed to play a game with no thoughts by either side, certainly the Cincinnati side, that this could determine a college football playoff berth. So Cincinnati, unlike UCF, which we will see in 2017 and 18, got an opportunity and seized that opportunity. And then Notre Dame went out and made the case for Cincinnati by finishing 11-1. So Notre Dame won all of its games, but lost to Cincinnati head-to-head. Therefore, the Bearcats made that college football playoff appearance at number 4. Bama at 1 is the SEC champion, upsetting Georgia, who finished at 3. Michigan, the Big Ten champion, at number 2. Again, the only claims would come from Notre Dame, but of course they lost the head-to-head to Cincinnati. Now, some people that believe in overall strength of schedule could point to Notre Dame playing a much tougher schedule than Cincinnati. Do I believe that Cincinnati was one of the 4 best teams in college football? No, I do not. Based on purely my opinion, I think Ohio State was probably one of the 4 best, but they lost on the field to Michigan and Oregon by 2 scores to Michigan. They did not earn a playoff position. Baylor, of course, won the Big 12 championship in a dramatic game against Oklahoma State. Had the Cowboys won the game, then Cincinnati most likely would have been knocked out, even though the Cowboys had lost only 1 game. Power 5 champion with only 1 loss. Oklahoma State lost by inches to Baylor. Therefore, it ushered in Cincinnati to the playoff. I have no issues with the selections here. And of course, Georgia went on to win the national championship. 2020 was obviously a controversial season from the start, and it meant controversial selections into the playoffs. The pandemic wreaked havoc with our world and with our college football season. Ohio State, for example, only played 5 regular season games, but many believe that they proved with a championship game against Northwestern, strong wins in the regular season, and then, of course, backed it up in the playoff with a 3-touchdown win over Clemson that they earned a right despite playing far less games than everybody else in the playoff. But the playoff looked like this in 2020. Bama, which proved to be the best team in the country by far, number 1, Clemson, Ohio State, and Notre Dame. And of course, the Irish played that season as an ACC member. That's, of course, another issue that we've addressed many, many times with the ACC and Notre Dame. That should not have happened. Notre Dame should not be playing in the ACC for 1 season, hightailing it after that. And they won the ACC regular season. They were the number 1 seed leading into the championship game and became the first championship game loser to reach the college football playoff. Did the committee get it right? The other candidates were basically Texas A&M. Texas A&M, the Aggies went 8-1. So from a record standpoint, they had the same 1-loss record in terms of the loss column as both Clemson and Notre Dame. They did not go to an SEC championship game because Bama was in their way, and they lost to Bama by 4 touchdowns. Had Texas A&M played Bama tougher, they most likely would have made the 4-team field because Notre Dame got blown out in the rematch with a healthy Trevor Lawrence in the ACC championship game, 34-10. Texas A&M's only 2 good wins. They beat a really good Florida team that took Bama to the hilt in the SEC championship game. Their only other win against a winning record team was Auburn, who finished at 6-5. So Texas A&M had a weak if there is such a thing, SEC schedule. The only other team I can serve up with some type of argument would be Oklahoma. They finished at 8-2 as the Big 12 champion, so they would be a conference championship team and could get that nod over Notre Dame there despite having one more loss. They lost early in the season to Kansas State and Iowa State, and the key there against the Cyclones was that they avenged that loss in the Big 12 championship game. Had that been in more dominant fashion than 27-21, maybe Oklahoma would have made a claim. In 2020, you also had the Cincinnati argument. The Bearcats were undefeated at 9-0, and we found out just a season later that they would earn a college football playoff appearance, but they did not have that Notre Dame opportunity in 2020. In terms of rankings, the two best teams that they played were Army and SMU. And consider in 2020, there were a lot of teams that snuck into the top 25, both during the season and at the conclusion in the rankings, Coastal Carolina, BYU, that would not necessarily have finished ranked had they played a legitimate schedule. 2020 was just odd. A lot of group of five teams, Louisiana included, found their way into the rankings. So the rankings less valid than typical, but Cincinnati certainly proved in the Peach Bowl where they outplayed Georgia, and had they managed the clock better, would have finished the season at 10-0 and then caused a very interesting UCF kind of situation at the conclusion of the season. But the Bearcats played the Bulldogs well down to the wire, 24-21, had that game late and blew it. So Cincinnati at 9-0 could have made the playoff field. In the 2020 selection, despite the arguments that I think are valid from Texas A&M and Oklahoma, the four that were selected are the teams that I selected in 2020. 2019 is a classic example of taking the four teams that earned it over the four best teams, and I'm fine with that. I want the resume to win out. However, sometimes there are teams in college football that we understand they're loaded with talent, they're loaded with future NFL players. They are just simply dominant teams that ran into a loss against a really good team, maybe had some injuries, maybe had some breaks go against them, but man, eyeball test, I totally understand the eyeball test. I don't back it because I don't trust everybody's eyeballs out there in committees and such, but I understand the eyeball test because I've seen it with 2015 Ohio State and here with 2019 Alabama. LSU, Ohio State, and Clemson all finished undefeated. They were the clear 1, 2, and 3, but in what order, we don't know because the Buckeyes were number one for much of this season, but LSU had a more impressive conference championship win, which vaulted them from 2-1 and set up a difficult Ohio State-Clemson semifinal game. Three excellent teams there at the top, undefeated. So what do you do at number 4? Well, you've got Alabama with 2 losses at 10-2. They lost to LSU in a great game between Tua and Joe Burrow in Tuscaloosa, 46-41. They lost to Auburn when Mac Jones threw 2 pick sixes. They lost that game on the Plains, 48-45. So Bama had 2 losses. Oklahoma was the Big 12 champion with 1 loss. So they earned the right to go to this playoff. But we soon found out that they were just not up to the challenge. They were not as good as Alabama. I was asked many times after the conference championship games were played, Mark, did the committee get it right? And I said, well, if you want the 4 teams that earned it, they got it right. Oklahoma earned it. Big 12 champion, 1 loss team versus Bama, 2 losses, and on the sideline for the conference championship game. However, the playoff showed exactly what we thought going into it. I said the 4 best teams in the country are LSU, Clemson, Ohio State in some order. Proved out to be LSU most likely. Certainly one of the dominant offenses in the history of college football. But Bama's better than Oklahoma. But Oklahoma earned it. But I said, shoot, Bama, look at what they did against LSU. They took them down to the wire. Can you imagine a semifinal game with Bama taking on LSU? LSU put up 49 points in the first half against Oklahoma. They're not doing that to Bama. Bama was clearly one of the 4 best teams in the country. However, the committee got it right. They rewarded earning the championship and earning the spot. A few other teams in the mix here, just to note, Memphis and Boise State both went 12-1. Memphis did defeat 3 ranked teams, Cincinnati twice and SMU once. They lost to an 8-5 Temple team. Boise State had no ranked wins. They lost to a 7-6 BYU team. Oh, the irony of 2018. Think about it. Notre Dame went to the college football playoff. They earned it. They were 12-0. However, they didn't play a conference championship game. So while Oklahoma had to fight for its life and for its playoff position, and Ohio State as well. Notre Dame got to sit on the couch with their 12-0 record, protected for the playoff. Think about this. Oklahoma was 11-1. They played Texas, avenged their regular season loss against the Longhorns in the Big 12 championship game. Ohio State lost to Purdue in horrific fashion, of course, by 4 touchdowns. They won the Big 10 championship game to finish at 12-1. So you had Oklahoma 12-1, Ohio State 12-1, Notre Dame in the clubhouse at 12-0, along with 2 perennial great all-time teams, Alabama and Clemson, who eventually met in the championship game, of course. So it was down to Oklahoma versus Ohio State. The Sooners got the nod because they did not have the egregious loss that Ohio State did. They lost to a much better Texas team than Purdue. They also got to avenge the loss. They lost in a closer fashion. So the egregious loss by Ohio State knocked them out of the playoff. I totally get the rationale there. The Buckeyes did beat better teams, though, in the Big Ten. If you look at the ranked wins for Oklahoma versus Ohio State had much better wins against the likes of Penn State, Michigan State, and Michigan in 2018. However, this is the irony of Notre Dame not playing in a conference. This is in 2018. Could you imagine if we had a scenario in which Notre Dame actually played in the ACC, where they have contracted games with the ACC, and actually instead of just playing 5 or 6 times against the ACC, they just upped that a couple games to 8 and actually competed for a conference championship? Could that have possibly happened? Oh, yes. 2 years later, Notre Dame is playing Clemson in the semifinal, the conference championship game, leading into the semifinal to determine the ACC championship. If we would have had this in 2018, we would not have been subjected to Clemson blowing out Notre Dame in the semifinal of the playoff 30-3. We would have seen Clemson cancel Notre Dame in the ACC championship game, and then rightfully, we would have seen both Oklahoma and Ohio State play in the college football playoff. We also had the issue of UCF. The Knights finished at 12-0 for a second consecutive season, and at that point, since they had won their bowl game in 2017, were riding a long, long winning streak. Let's see, I believe it was 25-0 at that point. They defeated Pitt, so consider the Knights did defeat a Power 5 team, not a really good team, but that Pitt team went to the ACC championship game. They did eventually lose 7 games, but UCF did all it could do, but they didn't have that luxury or that opportunity that Cincinnati would have in 2021 of playing the team that they had to play to get into the playoff. So for a second consecutive year, UCF at 12-0 left out of the playoff. But I am certainly one who defends UCF's right to hang banners to say in 2017 we did all that we could, and we will hit on 2017 next here at the Voice of College Football. This is our series where we are challenging the national championships. Please leave your comments below as we diagnose 2018 through 2022. We're going to do another video where we go through the rest of the college football playoff era, 2014 through 17, and then back through time, the BCS and the poll era. There is no end to this, only the beginning of the history of college football for us right here at the Voice of College Football. Leave those comments, share the videos, and like what we do here. Even if you don't agree with me, hit the like button. If you enjoy the discussion, debate, and analysis right here at the Voice of College Football.